So there are many different Flash game frameworks out there, but one of the simplest and easiest to use is called Flixel. And in this tutorial, or this is actually going to be a series of tutorials, I'm thinking around 3, but it could actually go more than that, of creating a simple game using the Flixel framework. So the first thing you want to do is to come to flixel.org, which is the website, and you want to download the the current most stable version, which as of right now is 2.35. And I've just unzipped that, and inside there's an org folder which contains the source code, and I've just put that into my global ActionScript directory so that I can reference it. So I've already created just a simple project here in Flash Builder. I've called it Invaders, and this is just an ActionScript 3, simple ActionScript 3 project. Now I've created some Swift metadata. 600 by 600 is going to be the size. The background color is going to be black and a frame rate of 30. And here's just my basic, default class that extends sprite. Now inside of the source folder, I have a few different assets here that we're going to be using. And let me actually just show you what those are. So first we have a background image, which is just an image of some stars. And this is going to be kind of a very basic game that we're building, but kind of like a Galaga game. And in fact, we're going to use some of the artwork from that game. So this is just our background image. Then our hero.png, which is our main ship that we're going to use. And you can see it's actually using the ship from Galaga. Then we have an MP3 file that we're going to use. Anytime the ship actually shoots a missile, we're going to play this sound. So again, simple MP3 file that we're going to use. So when we get started with Flixel, the first thing we have to do is our main class, our document class, or the main class of our application, shouldn't extend sprite. It should actually extend the Flixel game class. So it's Flixel game, and then we can just get rid of this import here. So now our main class, Invaders, is extending the Flixel game class. So now the call to the super constructor, we actually pass in some arguments to this. And they are the width and the height of our game, the initial state. In Flixel, everything is based on states. So the first time we come into our movie, we're going to show a menu. So that will be the menu state. Then level 1 of our game will be, our main state. So everything is state based. So this is basically saying which state of the game do we want to load first. Now this zoom property is interesting. So everything in Flixel is actually manually blitted to the screen. So when we see a spaceship and a whole bunch of bullets flying and aliens, those are not individual display objects. They're actually on the display list is just a single bitmap, and the Flixel framework is actually manipulating the pixels in that bitmap. So that technique is called blitting. Now this zoom property will automatically zoom up zoom up all of the pixels in your movie. So if you have really small pixel-based artwork, it can increase the size of that. So the size of our game, we want to fill our Swift, so it's going to be 600 by 600. Now we're going to create a new Flixel state called menu state, and this is going to be the first thing that users see when they come into the game. And then I'm going to set zoom to 1 because I don't want to actually scale up any of my assets. So and that's really all we're going to have in our main file. Now I'm going to go ahead and create that menu state class. So it's going to be called menu state, and this is going to subclass Flixel state. Okay, so now this is the first state that the user is going to be presented with when they launch the game. So what we want to do first is we want to embed that background graphic so we can actually use it. So I'm just going to use regular embed syntax here. The source is back.png, and we're going to create a class for it. And I'm just going to call this back, and it's going to be of type class. So again, common kind of ActionScript or Flex embed code here. Okay, so to the actual constructor, all we're doing is calling the super constructor here. So the way in which we work inside of the state is to override some functions in the Flixel state class. So the first one we're going to override is the create method. So let's override public function create. And this is essentially our initialization function. So as soon as a state is created, it's going to call this function, and this is where we can set everything up. So the first thing we want to do is we want to add the background to our state. So I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call it back. Now we don't actually, when we're dealing with Flixel, we don't use the regular sprite class. We use a special class called Flixel sprite, and this contains a whole bunch of other properties and methods that are specific to the Flixel framework. So I'm going to create a new Flixel sprite called back. And to the constructor, there's three things that are expected to be sent in. The first is the X and the Y position of where we want this sprite to be placed, and then which graphics class do we want to use for it. And for that, we're going to use our back class that we created there. So I'm going to pass that in at 0, 0, and then we're going to pass in that back class. So now to actually get this to display in our game, we don't use add child, we actually use the add method. And this is a special class for Flixel that's going to add our sprite into the game. So I'm just going to say add back. Okay, so let's go ahead and test this. And I'm just launching it in the Flash player, but we can see now it's actually immediately gone to our menu state, and it's displaying that background image. Now, a couple of nice things about the Flixel framework is there's some built-in things that you can do. If I hit the plus key, I can actually adjust the volume of the game. If I hit P, I can pause the game, and we can see we have a little menu showing up here. P again to unpause the game. So these are actually built into the Flixel framework. We don't have to do anything to actually get those. So now what I want to do since this is a menu is obviously I want to display some text. So now we could use an actual sprite. We could create a logo in Photoshop, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to create a variable called logo, and this is going to be of type Flixel text is equal to new Flixel text. And there's a few different things we can pass in here. First, we need to pass in the X and the Y of where do we want this positioned in our game. Then the width of the text field. Then the actual text string we want to display. So for the X position, we're going to use a property inside of the Flixel game class, which is just Flixel G. And this class basically contains a lot of functionality that you're going to use as you program your game. So let's go ahead and import that. So we're going to say Flixel G dot width, which is going to get the width of our game. Now we know it's 600 by 600, but again, you want to keep these things dynamic. So we're going to multiply that by 0.5, which is going to get us directly in the middle of our game. Now I'm going to make the actual width of the text field 400 pixels wide, and we're going to center that text. So what I'm going to do is to say minus 200, and that. So again, this is taking into account the width of the text field. Okay, so the next thing is the Y position where we want to put this text, and I'm going to put it at 250. And then the actual width of the text field, again, which I said was 400. Now we're going to pass in what text we want to be in there, and I'm just going to call it invaders because that's the name of our little game. And I can close that. Now we quickly just want to set the formatting on this text. So I'm going to say logo Set format. Now we can use other fonts, but there is a nice font that's included with the Flixel game framework. Again, very bitmap, 8-bit game looking font. So I'm just going to pass in null for that. And the next is the size of our text. So I'm going to make it 40. And then the color, I'm going to make it white. And then lastly, we want to center it. So actually in Flixel, we just pass in a string that says center. And now we actually want to add that logo. And again, we just use the add method. So let's see how that looks. We'll launch it up. And there we can see we have our nice bitmap looking text here for the logo of our game. Now I'm going to copy and paste this block because I want to create an additional line underneath that basically the user is going to hit the X key to actually start the game. So I want to put those instructions down here. So I'll call this instruct. And for the width, it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be also 400 because we're going to make the text fields the same width. Now for the Y position, we're going to put 280, and again we can test this and fix it however we want. But for the text, I'm going to pass in press X to start. And again, for the formatting, we're actually going to bring that down to 20. We want this to be smaller than the logo. And then I'm actually going to make this red instead. So let's test this. You can see, yeah, it doesn't look perfect because we actually need to bring it down more on the Y-axis. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm actually going to put it at 300. Again, we're not going for, perfection here. You can go for perfection, but I'm not going to. So again, invaders, press X to start. Very simple. And I'm actually going to bring that down to 320 just to give it a little more space. Okay, so we have this. Now how do we actually detect for when the X key is pressed? Well, another function you're going to override all the time, very important function, is called update. So this function is essentially called whenever your content in here is updated, you're going to have to call this update method. Okay, so when we come into this, what we're going to do is to check to see whether the X key is being pressed. And to do that, it's really simple. We just say if, and then we're going to go to the Flixel G class again. Then we're going to say keys .x, and that returns a Boolean if the X key is being pressed. So now if that is being pressed, we're going to change the state to our main game state that we're going to create. And I'm going to call that class main state. We haven't actually created it yet. But again, we're just going to say Flixel G, and then we're going to set the state property equal to new main state, which is, again, another Flixel state class that I haven't created yet. Now, the next thing we want to do is very important, and you'll drive yourself crazy looking for problems in Flixel that are often caused by the fact that you haven't called super.update. So you need to call that all the time, and this is not too big of a deal here because nothing's changing. But let's say in the update function in our main game, we have things moving around and all of that. We're not going to see any of that happen unless we call super.update. So again, remember to call that. So this is good. Now what I need to do is to create this class main state. So I'm going to call it main state, and this is going to also subclass Flixel state. And here we go. So I'm just going to leave it blank for right now. So we're going to test this to see if it actually works. Okay, so we launch it up. And again, the spacing's looking pretty good. Now if I hit the X key, you can see it's actually gone to our main game state, which is, of course, blank right now. But that's the way in which we actually change between states. Very simple. We just say flixelg.state equals new, and then whatever state we want to go to. So if I'm in, let's say, level 1 of my game and I want to go to level 2, I just set it to new level 2 or whatever I'm going to call that particular state. Okay, so let's go to our main state now. So we're going to need to do the same thing as far as putting the background. So what I'm going to do is actually just copy this, come into my main state, and I'm going to do this too because we need it here. And let me actually copy this override. So I'm going to override, copy both of these functions because we're going to be using them inside of our main state, and get rid of everything except our background here. And get rid of this. We'll keep super.update because again we're always going to need to call that. And let me just go ahead and import Flixel sprite. Okay, there we go. So now our main state is actually going to have our background. So now what we want to do is we need to create a Flixel sprite that actually contains our ship or our hero. Now what I'm going to do is to create a custom class that subclasses Flixel sprite. So I'm going to create it here. We're going to call it hero is equal to new hero. And again, I'm going to hit Control 1, and I'm actually using SourceMate here to be able to do this, which is a great plugin for Flash Builder. So I'm going to create a field. Let's actually create the class hero first. Now this is going to be a subclass of Flixel sprite. So we can finish, and here's our subclass here. And now we can actually, I'm going to create a variable up here. So private var hero, zip type hero. Okay, so now we have this Flixel sprite subclass called hero. So now inside of here, again, I'm going to copy this embed code just to save some time. Now inside of here, we're actually going to be embedding our hero graphic, and that is hero.png. And I'm going to go ahead and name this class hero graphic. Now the other thing I'm going to need to embed in here is actually that sound effect that happens whenever I shoot. So that's going to be source is equal to shoot.mp3, and for the class I'm just going to go ahead and call that shoot. So now we've embedded these two assets. Now what we need to do in order to get our graphic to display is we need to call the super function for Flixel sprite, and you can see it expects 3 properties to be sent in: the X and the Y position, and then which graphic class we want to use for this sprite. So for the X and the Y position, I'm just going to say Flixel G, and let me actually import that. Oops. So we're going to do Flixel G dot width, just like we did before. I'm going to multiply that by 0.5 just to put it in the center of our movie. And again, we want the ship at the bottom, so I'm going to say Flixel G dot height minus 100. So that's actually going to position it where we want in our movie. And now for the graphic class, well, we just want to pass in hero graphic. And there we have our call to the superconstructor. So let's go ahead and run this and make sure the position of our graphic is okay. So here's our menu screen. I'm going to press X. And oh yeah, obviously I haven't added it to our game yet. So I'm going to go to main state, and here we've created our hero, but we just need to add it. So I'm going to say add, and then we're going to add hero. So we'll launch that up again. Okay, here's our menu, hit X, and then there's our ship down at the bottom. Okay, so now we want to continue working on, in our hero class, because we want to put in the logic for when the user hits the left key, we want to move it to the left. When we hit the right key, we want to move it to the right. So again, we're going to be overriding the update function. So again, anytime something's going to update, we're going to do it in this update function and then call super.update. Okay, so everything in Flixel, all Flixel sprites have a velocity property. And this will, if we set, let's say, the velocity, and we can set either the x or the y, but if I set velocity x to, let's say, 10, and then we'll call super.update. Basically, every time we come into the update, it's going to push that that ship 10 pixels to the right every time. So if we run this, we can see what's going to happen. So we can see immediately the ship is automatically moving by itself, which is not what we want. But again, if we want to apply a consistent force, in any direction, we can just set the velocity. I'm going to set, when we come in, set the velocity to 0, because again, I don't want this thing moving by itself. So now we want to again test for the left key. So I'm going to say if Flixel G dot keys dot left. So then we know the left key is being pressed. We're going to set velocity dot x, and we're going to subtract minus equals 250. Now again, it's only going to do it one time, because the next time we come in here, we're automatically setting the velocity back to 0. Okay, so now we're going to do if keys dot right, then we're going to add 250 to the velocity x. And now we should be able to move our hero around with the arrow keys. And you can see now as I hold down the right, I'm moving to the right. Hold down the left, I'm moving to the left. So again, very simple to now control things using the keys. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to test for the space key, because the space key is what's actually going to fire our bullet. But before we do that, we want to go back to our main state. And the way in which we deal with something like bullets, because bullets essentially we're going to need a whole bunch of them, and what we're going to do is group them together inside of a Flixel group object, which is a way to group objects for our game. Now, if you're familiar with object pools, that's basically a really good thing to do for performance, because let's say in my game, I'm never going to need more than 15 bullets on the screen at any one time. So I'm going to create a cache of bullets. I'm going to create 15 bullets inside of a cache, and I can continuously reuse those bullets, which is really going to aid in performance. So I'm going to come under here, and I'm going to create a new property called Hero Bullets. And this is going to be a Flixel group object. And I'm going to create that as a field here up top. So what we're going to do is actually loop through a for loop 15 times to create 15 bullets that we're going to put into this group. And then our hero is going to be able to use those bullets to shoot with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a property here called bullet. And this is going to be of type Flixel sprite. So I'm going to create it outside the for loop, which again, just a good thing to do, best practices for performance. We don't want to be creating this object over and over and over again in the for loop. So I'm going to create a for loop here where I int is equal to 0, I is less than 15, I plus plus. So now inside of here, now I've showed you how to use Flixel Sprite with an embedded graphic, but we can also use essentially a drawing API in Flixel to create graphics from scratch, which is what we're going to do for the bullet. So I'm going to say bullet is equal to new Flixel Sprite. Now we're going to set the position of this off screen because we don't want these bullets to be on screen until they're actually ready to be used. So I'm going to set it to -20, -20. So that's going to position this off screen. So this has created our Flixel sprite, but now we need to actually draw into it to create our bullet. So I'm going to say bullet.createGraphic, and for the width of our bullet, it's going to be 2 pixels by 8 pixels for the height, and then we're going to make it a red color. Now for this, we actually need to pass in the full hexadecimal with alpha. So FF is for our alpha, and then FF, and then 4, like that. Okay, so we have our bullet created now. Now we need to add it to our hero bullets group. So hero bullets, again, we're going to use the add method. Oops. And we're going to pass in that bullet. So again, when this for loop is finished, this hero bullets Flixel group is going to have 15 of these bullets, which is going to be plenty for me to use. So the next thing I want to do is to create a property here that's going to hold my bullets. So I'm going to create a public property here. Public var, I'm going to call it bullets, and this is going to be of type array, because when we're dealing with the Flixel group class, so we're going to set the bullets property here equal to hero bullets, and then we're going to go to the members property. Now this is actually going to return an array of all of the Flixel sprites that are in that group. So essentially now our hero class is going to have access to all of those bullets. And the last thing we want to do is to actually add those bullets to our game, to the game's display list. So we're going to add hero bullets to our game like that. Okay, so now they're a part of the game, but now we need to add the logic here in the hero class for when the space bar is pressed, we're going to fire off one of those bullets. So I'm going to come under here, and we're going to say if flixelg .keys .justPressed. So this is a method we can use to see if the keys obviously was just pressed, and if so, then we need to actually fire off one of our bullets. So we're going to pass in a string, so we can just pass in space here, which again is obviously representing the space bar, which we're going to use to fire our bullets. So now what we want to do is we want to play this sound effect anytime we shoot. So there's a couple of different ways you can play sounds in Flixel. The easiest is just to use the flixelg.play method, which allows you to pass in an embedded sound class. So we have a class here called shoot, so we can just pass that in. So let's go ahead and test this and make sure this is actually working. So here's my menu. I'm going to hit X. And every time I hit the space bar, I'm firing off one of my bullets. Well, I haven't actually fired the bullets yet, but we have the sound effect playing. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to get a reference to the next bullet, the next available bullet that we're going to use. So I'm going to create a variable here. I'm going to call it bullet, and this is going to be of type Flixel sprite. And then we're going to go into the bullets array. Now what we need to do is to keep a counter or an index of which is the next bullet. And we haven't created that property yet, but we will. I'm just going to call it bullet index. And I'm going to create a field called bullet index. And this is going to be an int. And I'm just going to set it equal to 0. So when we first come through, we're going to be on bullet 0. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to make sure at the end that we increment bullet index, or actually we'll just do it right now. So bullet index ++. Now, what's going to happen is if we're on the last index, we're going to need to set it back to 0. So let's go ahead and put in that logic really quickly. So we're going to say if bullet index is greater than or equal to bullets.length, let's just set bullet index to 0. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we need to position our bullet so that it actually is directly above our ship, like where it's going to come out of the ship. So the way in which we do that is to call the reset method of our Flixel sprite. So it's bullet, and then reset, and then we pass in a new X and Y position. So for the X, what we're going to do is we're going to reference the X of our game, of our hero sprite, which we can get just using X. Then we're going to add to that plus width divided by 2. So this is actually going to get the X position of our spaceship, and then we're going to find out how wide it is, or half of that. And then we're going to subtract b dot width from that. Because again, and it's actually bullet, sorry. So again, all of this here is just to set the X position of our bullet to the correct position. So what we're doing is we're starting at the X for our hero, and then we're going halfway across so that we get to the center of the actual ship, but then we have to take into account the width of the bullet, so we subtract bullet.width from there. And that's actually going to work correct. Now for Y, that's really simple. We just pass in Y, which is going to be at the top of our ship, which is where it should be. So now what we need to do is we need to get this bullet to actually move, because okay, we're creating it, here we're getting a reference to it, we're positioning it where it is, but it's not going to be moving at all. So here is where we use the velocity property. We set bullet.velocity.y equal to minus 400, and this is going to, every time we come into this update function, it's going to move it up 400 pixels on the y-axis, which is obviously going to make it move up. Okay, so let's go ahead and test this part. So here's our game. We hit X, move our ship around, and now I shoot, and we can see our bullet sprite is actually moving up the way that it should. So you can see 15 is actually adequate for our object pool for our bullets, because no matter how fast I press, I can't get more than 15 on the So again, this is going to be different for every game. So you're going to have to figure out, what is the least number that you can get away with, because again, you want to keep your object pool for the bullets as small as possible. I just for this game, 15 turned out to be a good amount. So that's where we're going to stop for this one. So again, we've created the basis of our game, we've created a menu, we've created our hero, we've got the hero moving left and right, and we're able to actually shoot bullets with the space key. So in the next tutorial, we're going to add our aliens, and then we're going to perform some hit detection, which again, very easy and built into Flixel. So that will be part 2.